What's up, Rock Point kids? We are so excited that you guys are joining us online this weekend. You know, we've been in this series called Indescribable, and it is where we are looking at God's greatness and His creativity. Creativity is our month's theme, and creativity stands for imagining what you can do because you are made in the image of God. Today we're going to look at a story from the Old Testament. It's called Esther. But before we jump in, let's stand up, grab your friends, your family, your pets, and let's go into a time of worship.
I was lost and could not see. I was searching, you found me. Your love opened my eyes. My heart forever changed. No more standing still, no more going back. Oh, your love is moving me. I came alive when you found me. I'll never be the same. Oh, I shout it out to everyone around me. I am forever changed. Your love is moving me, yeah. Moving me, moving me. Moving me, moving me, yeah. Moving me, moving me. Your hands reach out to me. Only by grace I'm free. Your love makes me new. I am forever yours. No more standing still, no more going back. Oh, your love is moving me. I came alive when you found me. I'll never be the same. Oh, I shout it out to everyone around me. I am forever changed. Your love is moving me, yeah. Moving me, moving me. are possible in His name. All things are possible with our God, through Christ who gives me strength. I'm singing, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Yes, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength.
Wow, wasn't that amazing? I just love worshiping our God. You know, today we're going to jump into a story called Esther, where we're going to look at a character who is named Esther. Esther was born into an empire called Persia, and Persia was one of the biggest empires in that time period. They had taken over Israel and Judea and all of God's people. So God's people, they were scattered throughout all of Persia. But in particularly, we're going to look at Esther today. So one thing about Esther was she was being taken care of by her cousin named Mordecai. Everybody say Mordecai. Very good. So she was being taken care of by a guy named Mordecai. And this was because Esther's parents had died when she was young. Now, Esther is a character who became queen of all of Persia. And I'm going to tell you how she got there. So prior to Esther becoming queen, there was someone named Vashti. She was the current queen in all of Persia, and her husband was the king. His name was Xerxes. So Xerxes was powerful. He ruled the entire empire of Persia. It was a big empire. And one day, King Xerxes was throwing a party, and he wanted his queen to be at the party. But the queen refused to go. This made King Xerxes so angry. So what he did was he banished Queen Vashti. So King Xerxes, he wanted to find a new queen. So he held a contest. And Esther, she was in this contest. And the cool thing is, she ended up winning and became queen of all of Persia. Now the thing is, Mordecai, her cousin, the one who was taking care of her, told her, hey, you might be queen, but make sure you tell nobody that you're Jewish. And the reason why he said this was because he knew that the Jewish people, they were below the citizens of Persia. He didn't want anything bad happening to Esther. And in this story, we see a new character arise named Haman. Everybody say Haman. So Haman, he was a bad guy. He was like the villain in the book of Esther. I don't know who your favorite villain is, but this guy, he was like the villain of villains. He was one of the high-ranking officials in Persia. So Haman, he called everybody to bow to him. But the problem was Mordecai decided not to. And this caused a lot of anger between Haman and Mordecai. Haman was so angry with Mordecai. He devised a plan to get rid of not only Mordecai, but also all of God's people who were in Persia. So he went to the king and he got the okay that the law was signed into effect that all of God's people would perish. Now, this puts Esther in a tough situation because Esther was Jewish, remember? So Esther was so afraid that she did not even want to go in front of the king, because in this time, if someone were to go in front of the king without being invited, they had a chance of dying. And Esther was so afraid that she would die if she went before the king, even though she was queen. So Mordecai goes to Esther, and Mordecai says this to her in Esther 4:14. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. You see, Mordecai had believed that God placed Esther in this role as queen for a time just like this. Mordecai had believed that God was going to creatively use Esther to save God's people. So, upon hearing this, Esther, although she was still scared, went before the king. And the king had the decision to either let Esther live or to kill her. And the king had decided to let her live. So Esther, as she was standing before the king, she was still afraid. She got creative with the way she was going to talk to the king. She said, "King, how about we have a feast? How about we have a feast? We can invite Haman and Mordecai." So Esther went before the king, and the king had allowed her to live. In fact, the king was so excited that Esther was there. Even though Esther was scared, she wanted to make the king curious about her request. So she got the king together and said, "King, can we have a feast?" And Haman was invited. Haman probably felt really good that he was being involved in matters such as these. So the king says, "Okay, we can have the feast." So the next day, the king, Haman, and Esther were sitting down. They were having a feast. And I'm sure at this feast, there were probably pears, there were apples, maybe there was bread, maybe even fish, or maybe even French fries, because French fries are an amazing food. And the king was still so curious. He wanted to know what Esther's request was going to be. So Esther, she's sitting there and she's like, "You know what, how about we have another feast? How about we have another feast tomorrow?" So the king says, "Okay, let's do it." So as they're at that feast, Esther breaks down and she says, "King, please spare my people from the one who is trying to kill us." And the king is thinking, and he's like, "Who's trying to kill you?" And Esther says, "Haman." Remember Haman, the villain? Esther says, "It's Haman." And the king was so furious. The king was so upset that he ended up killing Haman. And not only that, he protected the Jews and he saved God's people. The super cool thing about this story is God used Esther in a creative way to fulfill his will. God used Esther in an amazing way to save his people. And going back to Esther 4, we see Haman telling Esther, "Maybe God made you queen for just this time as this." This was Esther's purpose. And the cool thing is, you guys have a purpose as well. God gave you a purpose. And maybe that's using your creativity to fulfill that purpose. Maybe one of your friends, they're feeling down, or maybe even your brother, and you decide to use your creativity to make them feel better. Maybe you made a card for them, or you invited them to play, or something like that. Always remember that you have a purpose. You have an influence. And that's because God made you that way. We're going to jump into our memory verse for this month. This entire month, we're focusing on Psalms 145:3. And it says this: "Lord, you are great. You are worthy of praise. No one can completely understand how great you are." Let's say that again. Lord, you are great. You are really worthy of praise. No one can completely understand how great you are. Rock Point kids, always remember that God is in control and that God loves you so very much. Well, I hope you guys have an amazing week, and we'll see you next weekend for our online services. Bye.